morning, everybody, whether you're on the East Coast, West Coast, or around the world. This is Hawk Talk. Thanks for tuning in. We are getting close to the end of the league year and, of course, the end of season 2 of Hawk Talk. Obviously, we will start season 3 right on the other side of the new league year. And the Seahawks now have their coaching staff pretty much ironed out. So now we start to look at what free agency will bring. Free agency opens on March 4th. So that is coming up quick. Lots of things that they have to worry about. There are roughly 20 free agents to take a look at. Some of them will probably be cap casualties because this is also a scenario where they're close to the cap. And so some of these guys won't be able to stay on the roster. Daniel, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you here. And of course, some of the news that came out yesterday, Geno Smith does, in fact, restructure his deal a little bit. It's not a big restructure. It doesn't add any time to his contract or anything like that. So basically what it does is he had a $9.6 million roster bonus that was going to be owed to him. This is coming on the heels of last Friday, where 12.7 of his contract was fully guaranteed. So that definitely indicates that they're moving forward with Geno Smith. Obviously, that is the smarter idea anyway, but the fact that they let that 12.7 hit and become fully guaranteed really shows that they are headed in that direction. So this $9.6 million roster bonus is essentially split between this year and next year because he had 2 years left on his contract. And so instead of that being hitting the cap that way, it frees up $4.8 million, and it brings his cap number down from $31.2 million to $26.4 million. So when you think of how much starting quarterbacks cost, that is an incredibly cheap deal, especially when you figure he's been very efficient with the ball. Obviously, 2 years ago, he gets to the Pro Bowl. They get into the playoffs. Last year, offensive line was banged up. Ended up going to the playoffs anyway as a injury alternate, but wasn't quite as efficient, but also didn't have protection. So that definitely plays a role. The fact that this drops down to 26.4 definitely allows them to take a look at some of the other free agents, as far as maybe being able to retain a guy. It does escalate next year's cap hit to $38.5 million. And really, by NFL standards, that's still a relatively cheap contract for a starting quarterback when you figure guys like Daniel Jones have a $40 million a year, and we're not even sure if he's going to start. So at the end of the day, moving forward with Geno obviously makes sense. And then, of course, when you look around the league at so many quarterbacks that are in the, $40 to $50 million range, or where Dak is getting rumored to be in the $60 million a year range, even at next year's value at 38.5, that's a pretty good number for a starting quarterback in this league. So I'm happy with what they were able to do. Obviously there's going to be some things that still have to happen for this team to be able to compete, at least at a high level. But as it sits right now, it looks like we have the quarterback that they're moving forward through this year, whether they re-sign Drew Lock or they draft a guy. Geno appears to be that guy. And, based on production, it does seem to make the most sense to me. And so we'll see what other things they have to do. But with a quarterback locked in, your coaching staff put together, when free agency opens on the 4th, we're going to see a fair amount of movement for the Seahawks team just because cap is an issue. There's a lot of free agents. Now, do they sign a lot of guys in free agency? Historically, probably not. But in this case, so many of the free agents are already on the roster. I imagine there's going to be quite a few signings coming on the heels of that. So last week, we actually ended up running out of time, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to go back and address some of the questions that you sent in last week, and of course some of the questions that were sent in this week as well. One of my favorite parts of this show is being able to interact with the questions that you send in. So, and if you're watching live, you can put them in the comments. We will address them live as well. But the questions that you send in all week. I always try and do as many of them as possible. So that being said, let's go ahead and get to some of the ones that we missed this last week. There's not a lot of Seahawk news, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on that front, just because the week before we already talked about the coaching staff that is in. Free agency period hasn't actually opened, so there's not a lot of new movement with the Seahawks outside of Geno restructuring that deal. So let's get into a couple of these questions. And one of them is a free agency question, is do they re-sign Leonard Williams? And you have to imagine that they do. And why I say that is they gave up a second and a third, I believe, to go get him. And if this was a half a season rental, that was an incredible waste when it comes to draft picks, to have this guy come in and then not try and retain him. That being said, they can't franchise tag him. Technically they can, but financially you can't. And that is something that's going to tie into a question that we have later, is kind of breaking down exactly what the franchise tag means, the very the different kinds of franchise tag. So there's going to be a little bit of learning today. So it's not just going to be an opinion piece like I generally have for you. I am actually going to teach you guys exactly what the franchise tag does and how it looks for the teams and why they don't get used that often. So, but that being said, can they use it on Leonard Williams? Technically, yes. There's no chance they do. That would put his cap hit at somewhere in, I want to say it's like 36 million. There's no chance they're doing that for Leonard Williams. That being said, I do think that they probably find a way through to try and re-sign him. Otherwise, again, it's kind of a waste for a half a year rental to give up those kind of draft picks. All right. So this one was asked in a variety of ways. So I kind of paraphrased them together. And what did I think of the Taylor Swift situation this year? And so a couple of things, right? Like one of them, did I find it annoying that they were overhyping it all the time? Of course. Yes. That being said, that's not really on her, right? Like that was on the TV networks. They were the ones spinning the camera around a viewer. It's not like she was down there seeking attention. She's up in the box. She's watching football. Like I can't hate on Taylor Swift for going to the game. So, and it's not like they don't highlight other, celebrities when they go to the game. It just happens that she was at a lot of them because they're dating, right? The fact that this is becoming part of a show is hilarious to me. But that being said, I actually don't really get the hate for Taylor Swift in this scenario, because this isn't something that she wasn't creating actions that required the cameras to do that. This was something that the networks were deliberately doing. And some of the reason for that is she is one of the most popular artists on the planet. Her tour did over $1 billion, and her being at these games is an estimated uptick for the league of roughly $331.5 million. Now, whether you're an exec and you like Taylor Swift or not, you're going to lean into that. 331 as just like a bonus because she's in the building. Yeah, you're going to highlight that person. And it's not like she didn't take the opportunity to do something good with that spotlight. After the shooting at the Super Bowl parade, she actually donated $100,000 to the family of the lady that got shot and killed. Right. So it's not like she isn't contributing back into the sports, family, so to speak. So I don't really get the hate, or certainly the level of hate that she received from sports fans. I get why maybe you don't want to see her. You want to focus on the game. Totally get it. But again, that's not really her fault. That's on the networks. That's on the league. Like, they're the ones that are pointing the cameras. So, I don't know. I feel like a lot of that was just not deserved hate, but it was there all the same. But that's kind of how I felt about it. Do I think they went overboard with it a little bit? Sure. Do I get why they did it? Yeah. From a business standpoint, made total sense. So do you think there will be more of it? Probably, right? If they're still together and he's still playing, it's going to keep rolling next year. So, but we'll see. But again, I didn't hate on her for it. I just thought it was kind of annoying from the networks. But when you look at a 331 million just added revenue, yeah, you're going to do those things. So, all right. If you don't think Geno is elite, why keep him? And he's on Cam Newton's QB managers list. So first off, I don't really care what Cam Newton thinks. is kind of a thing. So do I think Geno's elite? No, I don't. I don't think he's one of those, top 5, difference makers, as Cam Newton would say, in the game. And do I think that Geno is a game manager? Sure. But I don't view game managers negatively. If you look back over the course of the league, right, you're going to see guys that were difference makers, right, so to speak, or elite talent, or however it is you want to say that. And they win less rings than game managers, because game managers means they have a good team around them. They play within a system. They don't have to go play hero ball. I much prefer that type of football. I want a well-rounded team. I don't want a Josh Allen-led hero ball type situation, because you don't win in the playoffs. Like, it's not a sustainable win. You'll win 10 games a year. Sure. Yeah. You'll get into the playoffs, win the division, maybe a wild card, who knows? But the problem is now you're going to get into the playoffs against teams that are good, that are well-rounded teams. That's why they're in the playoffs, right? You don't typically luck in. So for you to then rattle off 4 wins, having to play hero ball, the odds are really low. It's why guys like Brett Favre, awesome talent, 100% difference maker, has 1 ring, right? And it's why he couldn't get back. It's why when you saw him with Minnesota, that team should have been able to go win a Super Bowl. But instead, he throws across his body into traffic, gets picked off to end the season. And it was the most Brett Favre thing to do. It's everything you would expect him to do. And so, do I agree with Cam that Geno is probably a game manager? Sure. Yeah, he's not that guy that's going to do anything hyper athletic. That's going to, he doesn't have a crazy arm where he can chuck it 80 yards down the field. He's not insanely fast where he's going to outrun guys and make huge plays with his legs. He's not those guys. But when you look at quote unquote game managers, you have guys in there like Tom Brady, right? Like, he's not a ridiculous athlete. He beat you because he could figure out your coverage and play within a system, right? Perfect. 7 rings, right? You have a guy, Brett Favre, hero ball, 1 ring, right? You have a guy in Aaron Rodgers, most of the time has to play some hero ball, 1 ring. So I mean, you look at these scenarios, and when you look at players that are hero ball guys and, difference makers, so to speak, or you go to game managers, the managers own most of the rings, right? Hero ball usually works once, and then people kind of figure it out. Outside of that, I'll take a game manager. You're in the mix every year. That's what you want. You want a well-rounded team and a quarterback that can command the system accurately. That's what you want. And so that's why I feel good about Geno being on this team. Do I think he's an elite arm talent, elite leg talent, any of that? No, I don't. But what I do think is he protects the ball. He makes good decisions, is willing to throw it away if the play isn't there, and lives to play another down. Well, you can win a lot of games in the NFL like that, especially if you have a defense that can actually get a stop. Now, it's why you see guys like, Dak, right? Why he hasn't gotten over that hump. Do I think he's an elite talent? No, I still don't. I think he's kind of that Kirk Cousins sort of guy, right? And the thing is you need a defense that can come up in the right spot and get a turnover or a stop or whatever when that quarterback makes a mistake, because that has been one of those things that you'll see from a Kirk Cousins, a Dak Prescott, a Matt Ryan. Like, they generally are playing pretty efficient football overall, And in the playoffs, they can never overcome that mistake, right? And the defense doesn't get them a timely stop, whatever. So when you look at the league, you only have a few elite guys anyway, right? You got Mahomes, you got Josh Allen, you got Joe Burrow. I wouldn't really put Tua in that mix. Like he's a efficient passer, but I wouldn't necessarily call him elite or anything. But yeah, so I mean that's kind of the way I look at it. So do I think Geno's elite? No. Do I think he's the right fit for this team? Sure. Besides, who else are you going to go get? When you look at the free agent market, what you have Baker. Baker's not an upgrade. You have Marcus Mariota, not an upgrade. You got Kirk Cousins. He throws a better ball, but shrinks in prime time, also has no legs. We don't know exactly what our offensive line is going to look like after free agency. So, that's a question mark. I don't think I want a statue back there based on the history of the offensive line for the Seahawks. So at this point, Geno, when you look at what his value is as far as what they're paying him in his contract, the fact that there's easy outs on that contract, he's probably better than any other option that they could legitimately go get. Because even if you wanted Kirk Cousins, the team couldn't afford him anyway. So doesn't really make sense there. So yeah, I like that Geno is still on this roster. It makes sense to me, both from a football standpoint and financially. All right. Let's see. Am I surprised that no one stayed on the coaching staff? No. Generally, this isn't 100% true, but generally, when you fire your head coach, everyone on that coaching staff pretty much finds their way out, because the new coach coming in has the staff they want, or at least has their guys in mind, right? And so usually if a team is getting rid of a coach, now this one's a little bit more unique, but usually when they're getting rid of a coach, the team's bad, right? And so usually they want a clean slate, just kind of top to bottom, on whether or not it's all deserved. Probably not. Like, I'm sure there's guys on the staff that, realistically should have been able to stay or could have stayed, or, something like that. But whenever you are, I mean, and this is true in normal business, like if you were taking over a company, usually your workers stay in place. They know what they're doing, but your management staff, or in this case, a coaching staff, that generally gets a lot of turnover. Now, you don't have the time that you do in a normal business to kind of slow play that management filter out. When you are coaching, your most influential moves are when you first get the job. So if you're making a splash, whether it's coaching or players or whatever, you have the most amount of latitude day one. And then the reins slowly get brought in every day after that. So anything you want to change, you have to do immediately. And that is certainly true, whether it's coaching staff. If you have guys you want in, you have to go get them now, because it's going to be much harder to do the things you want to do as time goes on, especially if you run into scenarios where you're either bad because now you're on a hot seat, or you're really good. So your GM may not want to move off of coaching that you already have if they're willing to stay because you are having success. So I'm not surprised that none of them stayed. I feel like some of them probably could have. But it's just kind of a normal course of action for business in general. If new upper management comes through, lower management tends to go with it. When a new head coach comes in, the assistants, the coordinators position, they generally all get filtered through. So no, wasn't surprised. This is one that I get all the time. And does Jamal Adams stay on the roster? I don't see how he can. Now, I know on his contract, they have a little bit of time left to make that decision before part of his contract becomes guaranteed. Whether if he's willing to restructure some of it to free up some money for the cap, maybe they hang on to him. But he feels like probably the number one cap casualty option is Jamal Adams, just because they're paying him a lot. He can't stay on the field. And even when he is on the field, he only does a couple of things well, right? Like, he is decent in the running game. because he likes to hit and he's good at rushing the quarterback. The problem is he is a safety on a roster, and he's not good in coverage. So when you look at some of the things that this defense wasn't very good at, it was stopping things up the middle, stopping seam routes, and if he's coming in as a safety and he has to play those coverage patterns, he gets torched a lot. So do I think he stays on? Probably not. This could be one of those, maybe they cut him and re-sign him if they really like something he could bring to the table. But they have I think they have a week to figure out what it is they want to do. But if they let him go, I think they save almost $10 million. And that probably makes the most amount of sense for a team that is struggling against the salary cap. So I don't think he remains, but he could. There's ways to, be creative, I guess, but I would think he's going to be out. All right. Should the Hawks go back to using a fullback? They had a fullback. They are one of the few teams that actually used a fullback. Nick Bellore was, he was a Pro Bowl in 2020 and 2023. So, I mean, he was on the roster, obviously didn't get tons of action, but, in a league that has kind of gotten away from a fullback, Seattle did have one. That being said, I mean, if you're going to have one, it's fine, but you got to incorporate them somehow. Otherwise it's just a wasted roster spot. So if they were going to start running, some split backs or something like that, where they used to do that with, Sean Alexander and Max Strong, something like that. That can work for sure. And certainly if we end up with offensive line play like we did last year, it would help open up some holes for, whether it's Walker or Charbonnet at the time. If you had a true blocking fullback, I could get into that. Absolutely. So I wouldn't mind seeing some of that, especially with how that offensive line kind of deteriorated throughout last year. Guys getting hurt, they're on IR for half the year, and then just never really clicking most of the season. So if you had a true, a true blocking fullback, maybe the running game would have had a little more success. So we'll see. We don't really know what the offensive philosophy of this team is going to be yet. It's a bunch of new coaches. They're trying to figure out what their identity is. We're going to find out more kind of as the league year kicks off, free agency starts, they start moving players around. We'll kind of start to see what it is their vision is from there. But between McDonald and Grubb, we'll see what that dynamic really looks like and what kind of offense they're trying to bring. At this point, we have a lot more questions than answers just because everybody's so new. We haven't actually seen them do anything yet. All right. Let's see. What are some cap casualties? Well, like I said, you probably end up with Jamal Adams on that list. We got, we got a few guys here that I think could potentially be, check through my notes here. Thought I had it together, but here we are. Let's see. Yeah, I had a couple of these here. So the page fell out of my notes here, so I'm trying to see if it slid in somewhere else. Okay, here we go. So it did. All right. So Jamal Adams, he has a $26 million salary, 20 mil dead cap. So, but there are a little bit of scenarios where they can save a little bit more money on that. I do think that Jamal Adams can be on the outside looking in. Will Dissly is another one, which, is a little bit unfortunate because as a tight end, he's been great for the Hawks, over the years. And the problem is he's slated to make 10 mil and his dead cap is only 3.1. So that is one where maybe it's a cut and re-sign because I don't know how huge of a market Will Dissly would have. But he's been great. His numbers have been good. He fits in this system well, or at least he has. I guess we'll find out what the new system is. But Will Dissly is probably one that gets either reworked or a cut and sign, or or maybe he's just let go. Tough to say. Let's see. Brian Monet, 5.9 mil, and his dead cap is only 500K. So that's one where it was a unit that wasn't great. It's kind of a lot of money, and the dead cap is nothing. So I do think that that's probably a cap casualty that does probably happen. And do I think he still ends up on the team? It's entirely possible. But if you were trying to find money in places, that's an obvious cut right there. Kobe Bryant, cornerback, 1.2 mil and a $400,000 cap hit. So that's another one where he probably doesn't end up on the team anyway. He was being converted from a corner into a safety. Wasn't particularly great at the safety position. They have enough corners on the roster that they didn't really need him. So he had a limited playing time. And although it doesn't necessarily save a ton of money, it makes sense that maybe you would probably move on just because it frees up, another $800,000, which realistically could be one of the rookie signings. So you probably see a guy like Kobe Bryant also go. There's other ones, but those are the ones that are probably the most advantageous as far as what their number is versus their cap hit. So I could see those guys all either getting some sort of cut and re-sign or just moved on from altogether. Obviously, the Jamal Adams one still carries kind of a heavy hit to the cap. But if you can save close to 10 million on him, I mean, you have to legitimately take a look at it, especially for a guy that really hasn't been able to stay on the field, hasn't been able to stay healthy. You're going to pay the low end of the cap hit no matter what. But if you can get a different guy on the roster that potentially is able to stay on the field, maybe that can be the difference. So that's kind of how I look at that. So those are a few of the cap casualties that I think are a real possibility. Obviously, we'll know more about that on the 4th when free agency opens up. All right. Potential picks in the 1st and 3rd round. That's tough. That's a tough question. It's something I've kind of gone back and forth on because they could get some offensive line at their position in the 1st round. They could go after their quarterback in the position at the 1st round. So it really comes down to, are they going to try and re-sign Drew Lock? I think he played well enough to get other teams interested in him. So he is a backup quarterback that can win you a game, which is, let's be honest, a little bit hard in this league. There's plenty of backup quarterbacks, but not all of them can come in and get a win. So I think that is probably a situation where they lose Drew Lock. If they do that, you have to think they're probably moving towards a quarterback. They got the 16th pick, so there's going to be some available. Penix, like we've said before, is probably going to be available at that spot. Bo Nix is probably available at that spot. JJ McCarthy's probably at that spot. So there's going to be some guys that are available that are going to be viable NFL quarterbacks, right? There's 6 in this draft that are probably a high level target as far as being able to play. And, rookie deals, they're going to be cheaper than what you can get a veteran at this point in Drew Lock. So if you bring him in, plus you have the idea set towards the future, when you have Geno, who has a contract this year and next year, but that's it. You don't know how long they're going to continue to, try and kick the can down the road as far as bringing in a quarterback. So I could see them with that 16th overall pick going ahead and grabbing one of those quarterbacks. Now, obviously, you have the offensive coordinator from the Washington Huskies, so they may lean towards a Penix who throws a really nice ball. He's not hyper athletic, though. So, it is a scenario where they got to have a good offensive line. He does have nice weapons though. So we'll see. And, in the something I didn't mention in the cap casualty question is there's also the opportunity where they potentially move on from DK and get some draft picks as well. So you could potentially end up with a 1 or a 1 and a 2 or a 1 and a 3, something like that for what DK can bring. Then all of a sudden it kind of changes what you can do in that first round. I think if you end up with 2 first-round draft picks, then potentially you do grab your quarterback and you go grab another offensive lineman or potentially an edge rusher or something like that, where the Seahawks have had issues in the trenches on both sides of the ball. So if you can get your quarterback of the future who can learn behind Geno Smith, and you can start to bolster the offensive and defensive lines that have had a little bit of an issue, then, I could see scenarios where that makes a ton of sense. You also end up with a nice situation where you have Bobo, who is a good talent, right? He is a good receiver. And you pair him with Tyler Lockett and JSN. And I mean, is he a downgrade from DK as an athlete? Sure. But, DK also brings some of those elements where he gets a lot of personal fouls. He causes, he ends up with drive killing penalties. He does have a tendency to drop some of the easier balls. He'll catch the fantastic ones. Obviously an absolute stud as a human, as far as, an athlete. He likes to block. He likes to hit. So, I mean, those are things that are rare out of a receiver. So, I mean, it's not that you're necessarily wanting to see him go away, but I can see where it would make sense because it'd free up a lot of cap space if you traded him. And you have guys on the roster that can play. So the other one that might be a restructure possibility would be Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett has a real shot at, because he is also a more expensive guy. He's older when it comes to football players. The thing that's hard about getting rid of Lockett is he can catch and does, and he doesn't take the big hits, right? Like it's something that when you watch the game is almost a little frustrating. It's something Doug Baldwin used to do as well. Catch the ball, go to the ground. But you never have to worry about them fumbling. You never have to worry about them taking the big hits because they don't. They get down, they protect themselves, and, would that one or 2 yards more that they could potentially get be better than the big hit and potentially missing time? There's times that is probably a thing, but for the most part, protect yourself, line up, play another down. So, yeah, I mean, but when it comes to the first and third picks, it's too tough. It's too tough to really give a solid answer on that yet. We really need to see what our free agency period starts to look like as far as retaining the guys we already have. If they start clearing a lot of roster out, it wildly changes what they need in the draft or what it is they even want to do with their picks in the draft. So, if you've watched the Hawks over the years, if they were to kind of clean house a little bit with a lot of the free agents, then all of a sudden you got to look at, do you move off of 16 so that you can add a couple more picks, right? Like maybe you go from 16 to 20, 24, 25, something like that. But then you pick up a third and a fifth and a sixth or something for the spot, right? Because somebody wants to go up and get a quarterback and they don't know if it'll be there at 24, 25. All of a sudden, something like that could make sense because not only are you clearing cap space, but now you're adding these draft picks so you can start to plug in guys. The only downside to doing that is, one, draft picks aren't all guaranteed to hit, and two, some of them need more time to develop than others. Like it's very rare for you to go get 2 tackles in Abraham and Cross and have them make huge impacts immediately like they did last year. So, there's always that element. But All right. So let's see. Should they get rid of the Pro Bowl? I mean, they already kind of have, haven't they? It's a flag football game now. Nobody takes it seriously. I know this got brought up because of the NBA All-Star game that was absolutely terrible. And of course, the Pro Bowl was just before that. Obviously, wasn't a great thing either. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like you wouldn't want to get rid of it because it's great as far as it's how guys get paid, right? It affects their contracts being in Pro Bowls and all pro honors and stuff like that. So I mean, there is that, and the flag football thing kind of makes sense because nobody was trying to play in the in the actual game anymore. So I get what they're trying to do. The skill challenges are still kind of fun to watch, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a game that I don't really train my eyes on, right? It's a game where if I can, it's on in the background, like a kind of, it'll be around, but I'm not really watching. So we'll see. We'll see if it's something they ultimately get rid of. I don't love it. I haven't really watched the Pro Bowl in 15 years. It's something that has slowly gotten worse. Nobody was trying to hit. Nobody was really trying to do anything. And just as more years went by, the worse the game got. So, and then ultimately now it's a flag football game. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess if they're using it as a platform to, hype up the Play 60 campaign about kids playing flag football and stuff like that. Sure. If you watch our Coast to Coast show, my co-host there, Pags, he had a good idea about, having it be 4 different flag teams and have them be coached by fans. I think that would be kind of entertaining. So we'll, who knows what it can evolve into. There are some ideas floating around that would make it a little bit more fun to watch. Because if you had a fan base that was, one of the coaches that year, then, you're going to have people tuning in from that fan base for sure. But then you're going to have their rival teams tuning in too, hoping that they crash and burn. So, there's definitely elements of it that I think could work. But as it sits right now, it's not a very fun product. Is it better than the NBA All-Star game? Absolutely. Everything is better than that game. That when you're putting up almost 400 points, wow, just it's absolutely dumb. So, really, the only All-Star game that really seems to make sense anymore is the MLB. Their All-Star game still works because you still have to play baseball. And the hockey one is still entertaining. But Major League Baseball, I think, is the only All-Star game that actually works as it's currently constructed. All right. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here. I wanted to make sure that I still had time left for this topic because I've been asked about it a few different times, especially because of Leonard Williams giving up stuff to go get him. And, I've been asked why we shouldn't franchise tag him or why we can't. Stuff like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the franchise tag and kind of explain a little bit more about how it works and how it affects teams and why teams don't use it a ton. So you start off with the non-exclusive franchise tag. Now, the non-exclusive is the most common franchise tag, and it allows a player to still explore contracts from someone else, right? So this is in a scenario where they are realistically like an unrestricted free agent. And so they negotiate with other teams, but it gives the team that franchise tagged them the ability to match the offer from the other team. If they decide not to match it and they let them go, they get compensated for that player loss. They actually get 2 first-round picks. Now, it's not in this next, wouldn't be in the same draft or anything, but they get 2 first-round picks for that player getting taken away during a franchise tag. So there's that. Also, some of the deterrent of a franchise tag is the amount of pay that you get. So if you franchise tag a guy, he's going to get the average of the top 5 players' salaries in the last 5 years, right? Or 120% of their existing. So say they're the best one in the league and they're already making the most money, they will get 120% of that contract. So, or of that, the single year, right? Or the average of the contract, I should say. But so you can tag a guy multiple times. This is also why you don't see a guy get tagged more than twice if they get tagged more than once, right? Someone actually getting tagged a third time is really rare. But so say your guy gets the average of the 5, right? So the next year would be 120% on that. If you tag him a third year, it's 120% beyond that. So it becomes something that it just doesn't make sense financially to do a tag all 3 times. And you can't actually tag a player more than 3 times. So, so that is part of it. When it comes to Leonard, he's already been tagged twice. So it doesn't make sense to try and do it again. He would cost roughly $36 million to franchise tag him at this point. So that isn't even on the table. One, they couldn't afford it anyway. There's just not enough cap space. But 2, it just you wouldn't do that for. I mean, as much as you want to tackle it, you can't spend that kind of money on him. So so that was kind of a secondary question that I got is, can the Seahawks use it? They could. They're not going to. It doesn't make financial sense. They could use it somewhere else. The other thing to note is you only get 1 franchise tag a year, right? So it's not like you can just franchise tag anybody you want. You only get 1 of those a year. And if you offer it to a guy and you rescind it even before he signs it, that counts as your franchise tag for the year. So you just threw a franchise tag away at that point. So if you're going to use it, you have to be really smart about it. And whether you actually go through it with it or not, as soon as you say you're using it, it's used. So something to keep in mind there. There's the exclusive franchise tag. Now, this is a little bit different in the way that you are the only one that can negotiate with them. And, and if they don't sign it, it's still the 120% or the average of the 5 guys, whichever's greater. But no one else can take them away. So you basically have them on a 1-year deal, which I guess is fine, but then you're in the same boat the next year. There's also the caveat to the franchise tags that after a certain date, that it changes a little bit based on the year, exactly what the day is. But once that date passes and they're on the franchise tag, you can no longer negotiate with them until the end of the regular season that coming year. So you really have to, if you're putting a franchise tag on somebody, you really have to work diligently to get that new contract in place. Otherwise, you don't get to talk about it at all until the end of the regular season. And then you're in that same boat. You still got to try and pay this guy. You can only franchise tag him again or get him a new contract, or they're going to walk. So, but with the exclusive franchise tag, they're staying on your team because no one else is allowed to talk to them. So then there is the transition tag. And this one is a little bit unique in the way that it's a little bit cheaper option. It's the average of the top 10 players. It doesn't have a 120%. It's the average of the top 10. So that one, you can get them a little bit cheaper. They can talk to anybody. You do have the first right of refusal to match whatever any other team is offering. So you do have, you still get the front, the first chance to keep that guy on your team. The difference with the transition tag is if you let him walk, there's no compensation. You just lose that player. That's it. So that's why that one doesn't get used a lot either. Generally, the non-exclusive franchise tag is the way to go, because anybody that you're franchise tagging, generally, unless you were going to do the exclusive, which really says we want to keep you. We're trying to figure that out. If it's the non-exclusive, usually that's a scenario where they're like, we want to keep you. We really like you. But if someone is willing to give up 2 first-round picks for you, we're probably going to let you go. So that's why the non-exclusive franchise tag is wildly the most consistent one that's used. And even guys that have been incredibly good, when you look at, Kirk Cousins is probably a great example of this. With Washington, they franchise tagged him twice, right? They basically were like, prove it multiple times, right? And ultimately goes on to Minnesota to get fully guaranteed contracts. He has 2 of them now. He's looking at trying to negotiate a 3rd one. So, that's part of it. But yeah, it's even a guy like him who is a stat monster didn't get tagged 3 times in a row. So just one of those things. Soon as you've seen a guy tagged twice, that's probably it. And the thing to keep in mind is the franchise tags follow the player, right? So this isn't something where I got franchised once in Seattle and now I get traded somewhere else a couple years later, and then I get franchised for, the Cardinals, let's say. That would be my second one. So it's not how many times a team has done a franchise tag. As a player, you can only be franchise tagged 3 times in your career. So it doesn't matter which team you're headed to, the franchise tag total goes with that player. So if you get franchise tagged once here and once somewhere else, or 2 times in one spot, doesn't matter. Once you move on, you still have those 2 tags on your resume, which means one other team can tag you. When once you've had 3, no one can tag you again. Now, again, it's cost prohibitive. Nobody's going to actually tag anybody 3 times, or if they do, it'd be exceedingly rare. But yeah, so that's just sort of how the franchise tags work. It's something that I did get asked a couple of different ways. And so I just kind of wanted to break down exactly what the franchise tag looks like, the financial burden that it creates. And also when you look at the franchise tag, it's not usually received well by the player either, right? Because at the end of the day, they want a contract. They want the stability of a contract. Now, when you look at Kirk Cousins, he embraced the fact that he was getting franchise tagged. He was just like, yeah, that's fine. For the 2 years, he ended up with, I don't know, I think it was like $69 million for the 2 franchise tags. So it's not like you're not going to make good money doing it. But generally, players want to get a long-term deal. It allows that, they end up with some financial stability if they get hurt or anything like that, right? So there are those downsides to being franchise tagged. But the biggest thing is why it doesn't get received well is a lot of times people view it more in the way of, you don't really believe in me. You don't want me to be part of this team long term. Like, it's sort of that Band-Aid fix kind of thing. Now, on the ownership side, would I have used a franchise tag on a guy like Daniel Jones? Absolutely. 100% would have done that. Because in that scenario, you didn't see enough from him to give him the money that he was getting, right? Like he's averaging $40 million a year. We've watched him. He had one good season, and his one good season really had to do with the fact that Saquon Barkley was playing out of his mind, right? So that is where, as a GM, I would want to use that franchise tag is, hey, we'll pick up that, 5th-year option or franchise tag, whatever. And I want to see you run this back. I want to see you be able to duplicate that kind of effort, which obviously they didn't do. And if they do, obviously you run into a situation where it's like, we should have signed him last year because now it's going to cost me more money. But I would rather spend a little bit more on a known product than having a one-off season and really not knowing. So that's kind of the way I look at the franchise tag, how it's used. And, again, how a lot of players don't particularly love the tag, mostly because they feel like they're almost being slighted a little bit. And, you know, I guess if you're the player, I can see that because you want stability, certainly in a sport where injuries are a big piece of the sport. So, yeah. All right. Other than that, we will not be here next week. I am going to be in Maui, and time difference wise, I just not going to get up at 2 a.m. to do Hawk Talk. So I'm going to take a week off, and I do appreciate everybody tuning in. And of course, we are again nearing the end of season 2. Going to kick off season 3 like a champ with all new coaches, probably a lot of new pieces on this roster. And of course, we are going to try and get to the NFL draft in Detroit. So hopefully we'll be able to do some broadcasting from Detroit at the draft. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, so that's kind of where we are. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy if you are here in the Seattle area. It is actually a gorgeous day out. Get out, enjoy the sun. And other than that, we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks for tuning in. If you are on Roku, be sure to hang out for the next hour. If you are on my channel, be sure to like and subscribe. It does help us bring our content to you. It is a huge help to like and subscribe any of your favorite content creators. All right. Enjoy your weekend, guys.